Join me for reflections on the beautiful heavenly writing of the cosmos and our mysterious place within it. You're listening to Michelle's Midheaven podcast, and I'm your host, Michelle Courvoisier. Greetings, friends of the stars. I'm looking at the greater dynamic today of the synodic cycle of Jupiter and Saturn. The word synodic refers to a coming together, so basically a conjunction. The synodic cycle starts with two planets conjoining on the same degree of the zodiac, and the cycle lasts until both planets come back together at some other point in the zodiac. The cycle that is the big traditional game changer is the one with Jupiter and Saturn. In fact, the start of their cycle is such an impactful event that we call it the Great Conjunction. And the current Jupiter-Saturn cycle we're experiencing now started almost 4 years ago on December 21st, 2020, when Jupiter conjoined Saturn in the first degree of Aquarius. As Pluto is about to move into Aquarius and awaken the degree of the Great Conjunction, we're also going to experience two Mars-Pluto oppositions close to that degree, all while Jupiter and Saturn are in the middle of their first quarter square. I thought it might be a good idea to go a little deeper into this topic. We can already learn a lot of information by simply looking at the dynamics of Jupiter and Saturn's journey together. So it always starts with their conjunction or adherence, which plants the seed for the entire cycle in the same way as the new moon phase is the start of something new. And then the faster of the two planets, Jupiter, will move away from Saturn, and then about 4 to 6 years later, Jupiter will make a square or a series of squares because they both change direction a lot, and because of their retrograde periods, there's going to be a back and forth between them. There's a long and deep conversation happening between them. The actions they initiate through an activating square aspect usually includes some reversals of fortune as they station and turn retrograde and direct again in between perfecting squares to one another. We can expect periods of growth, stagnation, reevaluation, and in that sense, the cooperation between Jupiter and Saturn usually involves the bigger projects of our lives, and just like any ambitious endeavor, we're going to have to cope with failures and also celebrate successes on the way. You will notice that after the start of any synodic cycle with Saturn as the slowest of the traditional planets, will always lag behind. Any planet that makes a conjunction to Saturn will leave Saturn behind to continue its journey through the zodiac. And this means that Saturn is always in the dominant or superior position in the first half of the cycle. Now, when I think of Saturn as a big procrastinator, it makes a lot of sense to me that every Saturnian cycle that we start is very hard in the beginning, because Saturn is always in that superior position, burdening the other planet and weighing it down with Saturn's own agenda. And certainly around the opening square, Saturn will exact a toll from the faster moving planet. Saturn is always going to have demands and will criticize other planets out of a genuine concern, demanding the greatest quality. Remember, Saturn is Libra's exaltation ruler, right? There's a great sense of righteousness and judgment. Saturn complains when another god does not take up their responsibilities. And in practice, it means that in the first half of any cycle with Saturn, there's going to be a lot of preparation time, a lot of contemplation, and then plenty of time to organize and plan everything. A lot of weighing and figuring out what to do. And this is because Saturn often starts from a place of discontentment, or rather, Saturn needs to finish things up and wants to let go of the past. In other words, a new cycle with Saturn has a tough start because we're trying to start something with a planet that is specifically associated with endings. So, what would the start of a Saturn cycle look like? Saturn's motivations are often negative in the sense that Saturn starts from a position that says, well, I don't know what it is exactly that I want, but I absolutely know for sure that I don't want this, that, or the other thing. It's always about rejection for Saturn, which is a necessary but often uncomfortable step in the eternal cycle of destruction and creation. So from that critical, judgmental, and sometimes nitpicking position of not wanting what is currently there, the other, faster moving planet involved now receives that negative Saturnian heaviness. We can then think of the topics governed by the faster moving planet because that planet's significations may point to the things that make you feel stuck somehow, or you don't really see a way out, or you have a hard time moving forward. It all costs a lot of effort. The faster moving planet represents the areas where you might feel a bunch of Saturnian responsibilities and obligations weighing on your shoulders. So Saturn will put a lot of pressure on the inferior planet in the first half of that planet's cycle with Saturn. Every transition into something new or every new beginning is dominated by Saturn's superiority. And therefore it might be difficult because Saturn tends to procrastinate or slow us down, or is very negative or critical when it comes to the other planet's agenda. Saturn is like a critical parent watching over our shoulder, letting us know about the consequences of our choices. The slowest and most impactful cycle with Saturn is the cycle between Jupiter and Saturn, because Jupiter is the second slowest traditional planet. Again, these are the big game changers in our lives, and the start of the cycle, as always with Saturn, can be pretty tough. The first step is always uphill. And I think we all experienced that with the most recent great conjunction that initiated the current cycle, which happened in the first degree of Aquarius on December 21st in 2020. The global lockdown at the beginning of the year was in fact the end of an era. It was a destruction that comes at the very end of a cycle. So the beginning of 2020 was actually the balsamic phase, if you will, of the previous Jupiter-Saturn cycle. It was the dark phase that prepares the ground for a new cycle to start. And now we're almost 4 years into that new cycle, and we're moving through the first quarter phase, which means that Jupiter has moved away from Saturn and is currently in the process of making an opening square to Saturn. And precisely because these planets are moving so slowly, they're going to make several squares or perfect several degree-based squares. And interestingly enough, these planets often make temporary sextiles or trines before finishing up the big quarter phases. That describes the gradual growth, the going back and forth between Jupiter and Saturn, moments of growth alternated with reevaluations and improvements. We went through the first of the opening squares around mid-August of this year, and we're going to have the next one on Christmas Eve this year. And again, Saturn is in the superior position in this big phase. And remember, squares in general are of the nature of Mars, so they represent a forward movement, oftentimes accompanied by a struggle, some kind of inner or external conflict that is necessary in order to overcome obstacles and find solutions to problems. Squares are very dynamic and initiate a lot of activity in general, but Saturn is very critical of growth and lets us pause a lot so we can take a step back and contemplate. However, once things are set in motion, once the blueprint of the plan is complete, so to speak, Saturn's perseverance helps us. It helps us complete our mission. But we're not quite there yet. The next time Jupiter and Saturn will perfect their square aspect is, like I said, on December 24th. And by that time, Saturn will be direct. It's currently retrograde, but will turn direct on November 15th, while Jupiter will still be retrograde. Now that's pretty significant because it was the other way around in August when Jupiter was direct and Saturn retrograde. So this time, Saturn is in a much more powerful position here, not only because it is in the superior position, but also because Saturn will be moving direct, continuing his journey through Pisces, and Pisces is, of course, Jupiter's sign. But Jupiter is currently being swept away by the primary motion. It is retrograde. And in its inferior position, Jupiter will have less to say since he has lost his willpower and self-agency. Now, Jupiter usually offers things like order, development, and growth, and has a harder time doing that in Gemini, which is a sign of his detriment. It makes it harder for Jupiter to tie the pieces together without becoming so overwhelmed by a myriad of details. There's a danger of holding on to the wrong or misguided beliefs in a desperate attempt to find meaning and restore some sort of unity and integration. With Jupiter now in an inferior position, exiled and retrograde, Saturn is going to take over in many ways. Saturn is going to confront us with the consequences of past actions and choices. And in a critical way, Saturn will pressure us to part with any illusions we might have and to take responsibility, to grow up, wise up, and choose the mature thing to do. To see how Saturn's stationing direct and the next square to Jupiter might unfold, take a look first, obviously, where Saturn is in your chart, what topics will be awakened there. But also, look at the process of incremental growth that is taking place where Jupiter is, because Saturn will address that in a critical way, pushing you to make work of it. And then also remind yourself of where the Jupiter-Saturn cycle started. Where does Aquarius fall in your chart? Because Pluto's ingress into Aquarius on November 19th, just 4 days after Saturn's station, will activate the start of the big Jupiter-Saturn cycle. It's a great opportunity to meditate on that, on what has happened since, and then define and plan more clearly where you want to go in that Aquarian area of your life. Well, let me know how it goes, and I wish you an inspiring journey. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.